Hello, welcome to the Ringer NBA show. This is Group Chat. My name is Chris Ryan. I am joined by Justin Verrier.
Hello.
And making, I think, his Group Chat debut.
Yes.
He seems excited for it. Kevin O'Connor. What's up, man?
I watch you guys every week.
You watch us every week, yeah. It's like ER. What's up, Kevin? Welcome to Los Angeles. Welcome to Group Chat. As always, this is our informal discussion of Los Angeles Ringer office Denzians about the world of the NBA. And the thing is that today we could just do the same show we would have done yesterday and the same show we would have done on Tuesday, which is that the Cavs are in turmoil, that the Cavs are about to trade for George Hill, that the Cavs. We're going to try and mix it up a little bit. The trade deadline is approaching, so we're going to discuss where some of these teams that are like on the brink of are we good or not, what are they going to do? Are they the best version of themselves? So we're going to play a game called The Best Version of Me a little later. We want to go through a little bit of quote-unquote news. Obviously, like the big thing is the All-Star game and the All-Star reserves draft that's happening today. By the time you hear this podcast, it will probably already either have occurred or have been leaked by Woj. I'm not sure which one happened.
The conference call.
Or
definitely.
Shams.
Yeah, right. I have to tell you that after about 10 days of thinking about this, I'm officially done thinking about it.
Yeah. I love it.
You do love it.
I'm still into it because I just want to see how the teams shake out. I think they're going to be nothing like we expected.
The draft itself, I'm interested in. The actual guys getting upset about not being all-stars, I'm like, I watch the NBA to escape from my life, not to be reminded of like petty disagreements and grievances.
Yeah, well, at the same time, that's pretty much all we're interested in with
That's
NBA
true.
too.
That's true. No, today we're only going to talk about Hawk set and pin down screens.
What a hedge.
What a hedge.
Wow.
We got to get through a couple of pieces of news, though. Boston last night beat the Clippers, ending their little mini swoon.
Tumultuous.
Yeah.
3-game losing
What's
streak.
the matter in Boston?
With a team meeting, too.
Yeah, well, that's what we want to talk about. They had lost 4 in a row. They beat the Clippers 113-102, which is good because now they have to go play the Warriors. Al Horford out with a concussion. His
Third in 2 years.
not good.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Especially with how long the first one kept him out.
Yeah, and they had a team meeting in between their two LA games. They lost to the Lakers. They beat the Clippers. And this is what Kyrie said about team meetings. Team meetings, it happens all the time. You could call every time we meet a team meeting. Okay. And throughout your professional career, there are going to be times when you're tested. And for us, it was things that we control and everyone being great at their role and us collectively coming together even better as a group. That's Coach Taylor, Kyrie Irving. Seems like it worked. For some reason, this Boston team it reminds me a lot of San Antonio, where I'm like, there is no sense. I don't ever get a sense of turmoil because of the management structure that they have there.
Yes, this is very much bizarro Cleveland is
Yeah.
what they've established, and especially with Kyrie going there, the metaphor kind of makes sense there. I do find Kyrie's quote to be very agreeable, simply because it does seem like we're at the point now where media is looking for these type of things. Any sort of blip on the radar gets reported by a Woj or a Shams. Maybe that we're making too big of a deal out of it. Obviously, they didn't have Al Horford, and obviously they kind of figured things out on the fly. I'm looking at them right now. It just seems like few minor tweaks is really all they really need. Jason Tatum took as many shots as Kyrie. I think that's more interesting going forward than anything they had maybe chemistry-wise.
Kev, it's interesting to see Kyrie as the spokesman. This is sort of what he wanted, right? Like, it's interesting to see him be the guy who's like, I'm going to go to the media and I'm going to be the person who says nothing to see here, which is what you kind of want from your team leader, right?
For sure. And I think Kyrie said something a couple weeks back or maybe a month or so back where he talked about setting the tone, right? Like setting an example. And I took it personally, as kind of like a thought like, well, they're back in Cleveland, the leader there doesn't set a tone defensively. He's lackadaisical on that end. And whereas Kyrie had his best defensive season of his career, setting that tone, setting that positive tone for the team. And I wonder if maybe that's something that he's tried to do this season, whereas in the past, he wasn't the guy who had to set that tone. He wasn't the guy who had to stand in front of the media and talk about team meetings and all the problems happening. So that seems like he's embracing it, and he's doing a good job with it.
These West Coast trips are always a challenge. Teams who are relying on young players are going to get some inconsistent performances, and they don't have. I mean, we were screaming at each other about Al Horford's All-Star credentials, or at least his All-Star starter credentials earlier in the week, but he's probably their most important player.
Sure.
You know what I mean? They can get offense from a lot of different places. They can get offense from any given guy on a given night. He is the anchor of that entire team on both ends of the floor in a lot of ways.
We bring up the Bulls a lot, especially I do, just because it seems pretty similar. It's almost like a more modern version. They're definitely a little bit more dynamic, definitely younger than that Derrick Rose Bulls team.
Yeah.
But everything really starts with the defense. They're still number one on defense overall this season. And as long as Al Horford isn't concussed and his pecs are just sterling, like,
and his eyes are sparkling.
Very nice eyes, yeah. I think everything works well. I think, like I said before, it is interesting to see some of the young guys, how they're going to develop over this next end. Even though Gordon Hayward, I don't know if you guys saw, taking some jump shots from three-point land.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of us do.
Gordon Hayward on one leg, having not played a minute of meaningful basketball this year, looks better than Markelle Fultz right now. Speaking of Markelle Fultz, speaking of the
Sixers, he could always come back.
Yeah, that's true. Ben Simmons. I have it written down here. Ben Simmons is God. 19 points, 17 boards, 14 assists last night against the Bulls. I like watching games when, especially on a player's ascendance in their first few years of the season, where you catch them in a game and you're like, oh, you're the best guy on the floor. Best guy on the floor on both teams. That happened a lot with Giannis in his second season, where you started watching him, you're like, oh man, this guy's going to be really special. Ben, it's like, I can't believe he's not in his fifth year. The way he sees the game, the lack of emotion, I think, and the sort of sometimes personality vacancy that happens with him is like a knock that maybe sometimes makes him not a lovable player. But I don't know if I've ever been more impressed with a rookie in recent years. You know, just watching him control a game like this.
His instincts are just elite already, right? And, I mean, there was a play at the end of last night's game. I think it was his last points that he scored where he grabbed an offensive rebound at the top of the key. And, like, as he's grabbing the offensive board, he's going into a spin move behind the back as it's happening because he's able to feel the defense and read the defense when everything's going crazy. I mean, his ability to read the floor and see the floor and pass open teammates is really in the upper percentile of NBA players, and he's only 21 years old already.
Yeah, one of the things I think we were most struck by when he started the season and he kind of took off, was that his shooting really didn't seem to be a problem. Yeah. That he was able to use his body and be kind of more crafty, more physical to overcome that. I think he hit a bit of a wall later on in the season,
right?
Because it started to become an issue. But
like
now
3
it's
months in, it was the most basketball he's ever played.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This is about the time when like a college season would end.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's getting a second wind or whatnot. I mean, one thing I had been thinking about, which I think is interesting, is do you think we would appreciate him more if he didn't make such an effort to label himself a point guard? Like if he was more of LeBron and he almost like messaged himself as a forward,
sure.
Do you think that we would say like, oh my God?
Okay, so the flip side of that is, would his shooting be even more would this lack of shooting be even more egregious in this 2018 NBA? Can you be a three who doesn't even attempt 3-pointers?
Honestly, I'm at the point when I hear the words point guard, power forward, I just hear white noise.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean anything, with today's positionless game. I mean, with his shooting, I think it's a problem no matter what position you play, unless like you are specifically a rebounding defensive-oriented center, and even then it could potentially be an issue depending on the team.
Well,
it is a problem.
Let's interrogate that a little bit. Who are we talking about? We have Ben playing on the Sixers. You've got Giannis on the Bucks, and you've got LeBron on the Cavs. Who are some other teams that are basically doing away with positions, letting someone unconventional run their offense? Can you think of any? Because I wonder
Blake, to a certain extent,
that's a
but
good
Milos.
point.
I mean, I think they're at their best when Milos is kind of in there, kind of moving the ball. It is a rarity still.
I mean, there's a lot of teams that, you could look at Boston as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kyrie's the point guard, right? But at the same time, Al Horford brings the ball up a lot. They allow virtually anybody who gets the offensive board. The Warriors, Draymond Green,
right?
He's more the point guard than Stephen
Sure.
Curry, right? That's where for me it's like positions. I don't know if there's a better way to label players to put them like into categories, but the way it's done now, there are no positions.
Well, I guess the thing we're saying here is with LeBron, and LeBron couldn't really shoot when he first got into the league either. But I think what you're talking about is, do we let the fact that he's like, aren't I great as a point guard, impact the way we view Ben, right?
Right.
Rather than if he was a small forward who couldn't shoot but could pass his ass off, would he be evaluated differently?
Right, because I was just looking at his numbers the other day when we were going over All-Star stuff, and you look at his shooting percentage. His shot percentage and his profile almost looks like a center because he shoots poorly from free throw, but he shoots above 50% from the floor. And I wonder if we viewed him through a different lens, if we'd almost appreciate it. If there was no Joel Embiid and he played nominal 5, would we say, oh my God, look at this center who's just able to create? Would he be more Jokic-esque?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple.
That's a good point.
I think that we were talking a little bit before the podcast about what's going to happen with him, assuming the Sixers make it into the playoffs. Do you think that this he's shooting I see 50% effective field goal percentage essentially, but he's only shooting 56% from the line. So, do we start seeing more hack-a-ben? Do we start seeing guys sag even more off of pick and rolls with him? What is late season Ben Simmons?
I think for
like?
Ben Simmons, it's gonna be a wake up call. Like, oh dang, I do have to add a jump shot. Otherwise, in the games that actually matter, you're gonna be limited. When it turns into a half court game, when you're not able to get those easy transition chances, when defenses are really locked in game planning
and Jonas
for you,
and Serge Ibaka are waiting for you in the lane for 4 games in a row.
It's gonna be a problem for him in the playoffs. I think he's an unbelievable player. But which speaks to how great he could potentially be if he does eventually become even just an average shooter. Like you said, LeBron was a below-average shooter early in his career. Giannis is a below-average shooter now. If he can even just get to that level, think about what it does for his game. Never mind if he becomes good. He just needs to be average, below average, and that opens things up
You've
for him.
written about shooting mechanics before. Do you see any evidence that Ben Simmons could ever be a threat?
He shoots with the wrong hands.
Yes,
so,
that's right.
I mean,
so that was the setup for the spike. Ringer NBA podcast would not be complete without talking at least 20% of the time about the Cavs. And why not? I mean, they keep giving us storylines, so we are waiting for this George Hill trade that could go through while we're recording or before this goes up. It was supposedly on the 1 yard line. Windhorse was on Zach Lowe yesterday and said a couple of things that didn't get foregrounded a lot, which was like, why hasn't it gone through yet? And they're doing their due diligence. And Hill has had a lot of chronic, some injuries, like toe injury, I think. And I think the last thing the Cavs need is another guy who immediately comes in and needs to be rehabbed.
Yeah.
So we're waiting for that trade to happen. We also just got news that Ty Lue is going to drop Jay Crowder from the starting lineup and replace him with Tristan Thompson. So that's going to happen, I guess, to give them some defensive fortitude in the first unit. I'm not really sure what that answer is, which kind of also brings us to another piece of Cavs news, albeit pretty rumor mongering, is that Stephen A. Smith said that Dan Gilbert is looking to sell the Cavs.
Sure. Not a good sign if you're LeBron James.
Or is it?
Yeah.
Is the pathway to LeBron buying the Cavs the way to keep LeBron in Cleveland?
I love this theory because this is basically kind of the foundation of my LeBron to the Knicks kind of fever dream.
Right.
Is that sell at least a little part of it to LeBron's crew, and then from there he can kind of eventually go into his retirement with a piece of the team.
It reminds me of a story that last summer for some reason just flew way under the radar. Dan Patrick said that LeBron tried to get Dan Gilbert to switch ownerships with Detroit Pistons.
Yeah.
Like, that was a story nobody really talked about because it was during the finals that Dan Patrick said this on the air. And he cited someone with firsthand knowledge of it. And if that's true, if LeBron pushed for Dan Gilbert to switch teams with the Pistons, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah.
Maybe Dan Gilbert is open to it or something like that. But at the same time, if you're going to sell, like, it has to be with LeBron on the team. Otherwise, if he leaves, you're not going to get the same amount of money for the team.
It's the ultimate chess move in some ways, because if Dan Gilbert has a Cleveland team, and by all accounts, like, wasn't that Cleveland casino right near the Q and relies heavily on high attendance at the Q and like people coming to see LeBron and all that stuff. If LeBron leaves and the team creators, theoretically, that would also have a bad impact on some of his other assets as a businessman. If LeBron stays, everything's good. But what LeBron now has is the leverage to say, like, well, you have to sweeten the pot beyond just a contract, because clearly this isn't going right in Cleveland, but I think that there is something to watch there about, like, I do think LeBron is thinking about the third act of his career. I think LeBron is thinking about post-basketball now. And being the owner of the Cavs would certainly be quite the last chapter for him and all the guys he grew up with in Akron and that crew of guys like Rich and Maverick to take over an NBA team in their home state would be an incredible story.
Right, and that's why the Lakers are rumored, right? Because he has so many business interests in LA. I do think it's interesting. I've been a little critical of LeBron, of CEO LeBron, and kind of how that's affected maybe some of the moves the Cavs have made, some of the moves that he has made. I can see it from his side now, where Dan Gilbert, classic rich white male, is basically like, well, I'm going to get out of here before my asset tanks.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe he even keeps the casino, and LeBron takes, let's say LeBron theoretically takes over. He would make even more money.
And what you said about, LeBron thinking about ownership, that is the plan.
Yeah.
Like that is the plan. Like, it's not just rumor. That is the plan for LeBron. Like, he wants to go into ownership.
KD's over here like, yeah, I would like one too, please.
In December, I thought LeBron was going to win the MVP, and I thought he was going to re-sign with Cleveland for another 2-year deal. It just looked like he was really engaged. It looked like he looked highly motivated. The prospect of Isaiah coming back seemed to be like, and then we're going to get Isaiah back, and we're going to really make a run at this thing, and we still have this Brooklyn pick, and Kevin Love was playing well, obviously enough to make the All-Star team. And just in the last 3 weeks, and especially in that San Antonio game, he just looks completely switched off and disengaged. Now, that's not something, maybe that's something a 2-week vacation in Miami could fix. I have no idea. But it just seems like you can never really count on the future with him, because you just never know what the status of the team is, what the state of his head is at.
Yeah, he's completely flipped the dynamics, where it seems like not only in the offseason, not only in the personnel moves that you make, you have to kind of appease him more than anything, but even in the regular season, as you were saying, it almost feels like he wants a roster constructed specifically for him to take off certain days, for him to be able to rest. But it has to be kind of
crazy, because it's not like he has been denied that, right? Like on the Zach Lowe pod, Windhorse was like, LeBron is mad because LeBron feels like he should be playing on a team with Eric Bledsoe and Paul George, that those trades were available, that Kyrie for Eric Bledsoe was available, and that some trade for Kevin Love, whether it was the Phoenix pick that they got from Kyrie or some trade for Paul George, whether it was the Phoenix pick for Kyrie that wound up being Josh Jackson, or just straight up trading Kevin Love to the Pacers for Paul George, that was on the table, and that Gilbert messed it up by either getting rid of Griffin or not being able to complete the deal himself. But LeBron gets what LeBron wants at the end of the day. Dwayne Wade is on the Cavs. You know what I mean? These guys, like the veteran team, this is the team that he wants to play with. He doesn't want to play with kids. He doesn't want to play with guys he doesn't like or doesn't know. And this is where we're at.
He always gets what he wants.
Yeah.
He got Thompson paid. He got J.R. Smith paid. And it's interesting now, like with what Windhorse said yesterday, everything that's been reported about LeBron's thoughts, about what he's going to do, points in the direction of either leaving or going to make the ultimate chess move and like ask for a piece of ownership or something like that. Before the season, Chris Haynes had the report that LeBron won't waive his no trade clause, which kind of puts it in Cleveland. Like when people were saying, "Oh, well, should they trade him?"
Right.
It's like, no, that was silly. And then Mav Carter went on Rich Eisen, and he said there, "Oh yeah, LeBron, it's only about winning, right? That's the only thing he cares about is winning." And then all the stuff lately with like going for George Hill, needing more, a prominent player in the Cavaliers locker room, saying that they need more. Then yesterday being, saying unhappy they didn't get George or Bledsoe. All of it points in the same direction.
Right.
And I find that fascinating how LeBron is a master at kind of setting the narrative. I don't know if it's for his own interest, but it sets it in a way where it sets up the next step for him, whatever it is.
I think it would be really great if the prominent player turned out to be Kyle Korver this whole time.
Well, it does sound like from reports that there was a thing in the New York Daily News that one of the major instigators against Love, the person who was most keyed in on this idea that Kevin Love bounced from the Oklahoma game because he was sick and just left the arena and then missed practice next day, was Isaiah Thomas.
Which is crushing, because I showed you the photo the other day when they were like 10 years old hanging out in Seattle. Just good friends, better enemies.
It is also, Kevin, you and I were talking about this. I really like Isaiah Thomas's game, but Isaiah Thomas has had a couple of burned bridges in teams past. Yeah. Whether it's Isaiah saying they didn't treat me right or the team being like, we're not too sad to see Isaiah go. Everybody was like, how did Sacramento trade this guy? How did Phoenix trade this guy when he was on Boston? I don't know. I mean, a guy who's like clearly playing at like 60%, is a terrible defender, and the team is pretty much nosedived since you got back in the lineup. I wouldn't necessarily be like Kevin Love's not allowed to have the flu.
Are you saying that a guy that hangs out routinely with Floyd Mayweather might have some like compromising behaviors?
I think with Isaiah, I mean, I don't know if I totally buy, that it was just him.
Sure.
I buy everything else that's saying it was everybody pointing the finger at everybody else. Maybe Isaiah and Love were the two main culprits people were talking about.
But this is the thing with these veteran teams, when you get guys who are sort of not ring chasing, but if you've got Derrick Rose and you got like all the guys are old in the last 3 to 5 years of their career and are essentially only interested in a ring and aren't interested in doing all the stuff that we talk so much about in the NBA, which is like this culture setting and planning for the future, bringing in young guys, developing a Cavs way. There is no Cavs way. There is no Cavs way. There is LeBron, and whether or not all the guys in that room are getting along with LeBron.
It is interesting, though, because I think all of the moves that they made this offseason were bad. And it's not only that LeBron and his guys that he brought in, some of his friends haven't worked out. Dwayne Wade's looked good at times. But also the Brooklyn pick trade, that was a complete misevaluation, not only for Jay Crowder, not only...
see Dinwiddie coming.
Exactly, but like, don't you have a projection model that shows that the Nets might be like pretty decent next year?
Yeah.
Well, everybody this summer when
who has a projection model?
Well,
Because
Dan
David
Gilbert.
Griffin might have.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Kobe Altman probably doesn't. So I mean,
don't
when they made that trade, there was no GM.
Yeah.
everybody this summer, like when we like me and Bill on the pod were like, the Nets could be solid.
Yo,
they could be solid.
course.
Everybody's like, oh no, it's
Team
they're
ringer.
going to be horrible. It's like, no, they don't need a tank.
But dude, and
Everybody
even
else
in the
is.
NBA circles, like guys were like, Kenny Atkinson is that
Exactly.
guy.
Right.
I owe my career. Like
Exactly.
people were freaking out about Kenny
Exactly.
Atkinson, and they play.
And
They
have
play
talent.
basketball in a way that's going to give them a chance.
And they were going for it. They
Yeah.
have no reason to bottom out. That puts them
Absolutely.
above like
Exactly.
at least 6 teams.
And they have that huge nobody believes in us thing. Okay, guys, I want to play a little game. There's no winner in this game. It's just a conversation starter. But I want to play a game called The Best Version of Me. We've been talking a lot over on Ringer FC and writing pieces on the Ringer this year about how Manchester City has driven everybody insane in the Premier League. They basically won the league before Christmas. They had it sewn up. And all these rich teams managed by huge managers have started to basically crack up because they're like the pressure of we weren't good enough this year and we already know it and we have all this runway to look at it has made everybody a little bit nuts. And I think that there's a little bit of that happening in the NBA right now where the Warriors are so far and away better. I mean, Rockets fans chill out, but like the Warriors are the class of the league and have been for the last few years that teams that are like in any other era, we might have a shot. We don't now. We don't as long as Steph, KD, and Draymond are playing at this level. So what is the best version of these teams? Because the best, obviously their goals are to win the finals. But what I'm really curious about is what should Cleveland really realistically be expecting from the guys they have assembled or from the guys that they want to bring in? So I just want to ask a few questions about this. Like they're moving Tristan to the starting lineup. Kevin, what does that do for what's the difference in the way Cleveland was playing basketball earlier in the season to the way they could be playing basketball now if they move Tristan into the starting lineup?
I think on paper, at least. I mean, we'll see how Tristan Thompson still, gets back from that calf injury he had early in the season. But on paper, it should help their interior defense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a revolving door. But thing is sometimes your best rim protection is on the perimeter, not in the interior. So Thompson could help even if he gets back to 100%. But that still doesn't change the problems on the perimeter because if you're allowing that penetration inside, that's going to give you issues even if you have Rudy Gobert back there.
Right, and I assume they made this change going into the season specifically because they don't want Kevin Love chasing around some of those stretch fours.
Yeah.
And I wonder how long this is going to last because of this. It almost strikes me as a move to kind of like reclaim the glory of the year that they beat the Warriors in the finals.
Yeah.
Like we really mucked it up. We had Tristan in there kind of grabbing every rebound. Love played fine on defense enough to win us that series. And it's kind of a reach here, especially because they don't have Isaiah playing the Kyrie role because he's just not where Kyrie is.
Maybe Thompson's more comfortable in that starting role too. I mean, ideally any guy can come off the bench and 4 minutes left in the game and get hot, and feel good. But some guys like Thompson, maybe he's better starting, right? Whereas Jay Crowder has some experience coming off the bench. But even Jay could be negatively affected too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You're someone who saw Jay a lot in Boston, and you've mentioned before that he's a sensitive soul, right?
Yeah, he likes to start. I mean, it's not often you hear a player come out and complain when fans cheer for an opposing player. It was just an odd thing for him individually to come out, and that's when they cheered for Gordon Hayward.
Justin, I take your point about trying to get back to this imaginary that's Cavs basketball, know, and play bully ball and have it be LeBron with big guys down low and everything. But when they played their best this season, albeit against lesser competition in that December run that they had, it was with Kevin Love at the 5 and it was with no Isaiah Thomas. And I mean, Isaiah the seal is broken. They can't put him back on the bench now. But I do think that there's an argument to be made to bring Isaiah off the bench as a spark plug offensive player. Whether or not that goes down well with Isaiah, who's also in a contract year, he's losing money every game as it goes now. So it can't get worse, right?
We talked to Kevin and I just briefly, like, what is Isaiah's next contract going to look like? Is he going to be a veteran minimum guy going forward simply because of the hip injury? I would push back slightly on your point about just the team being better with Kevin Love at the 5. I think they were at their best when LeBron was playing insane. When he was shooting threes better than he ever had. When he was shooting free throws better than he ever had. And so I might suggest that their best version is to get rid of most of these guys. Trade Kevin Love, trade everything that you have, and try to build an entirely new team before the deadline.
Around LeBron?
Yeah. So get DeAndre Jordan. Maybe try to swing a trade with Kevin Love to get some spare pieces, maybe like an Aaron Gordon, maybe some guys from the Pistons, bring in George Hill, and effectively put 3-4 new guys in that starting lineup. And then if he leaves, just start anew.
It would be unprecedented for a team to have this kind of overhaul. The Sixers did that, like Van Horn for Mutombo trade in 01.
All midseason?
Yeah, the Pistons brought in Wallace in 04 and essentially won the title with his rival, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember anything where a team would trade like 3/5 of their starting lineup. So if you got rid of, I mean, honestly, it sounds like to me, if they can get anything for Isaiah Thomas right now, they should investigate that, because like his return to the starting lineup and his return as his arrival as a vocal member of this team does not seem to have had a positive.
What are you going to get though? I mean, he had no value this summer, none.
He might be just an expiring.
What is he exactly? And that does have value,
right?
You know, with the nature of the cap now flattening out, perhaps there is value. But even then, his cap number is still only 7, right? So that's not going to get you. It's not like it's a $17 million expiring. We're going to bring in star player. You still need to package him with other pieces, and it's a shame that we're talking about Isaiah like that. Just 1 year ago. Think about the conversation with him. Like, whoa, MVP candidate, even though he really wasn't. The fact is, he still finished 5th.
One of the teams that's been mentioned a little bit in rumors as a partner with Cleveland for trades, whether it would be Kevin Love going out or whether it would just be that Channing Frye, Iman Shumpert nothing burger that they keep saying it seems to be like worth anything right now
for Boogie
is Portland. Now, Zach and Brian had talked a lot about like whether or not a Love I'm coming home move could be made here. I would not do Cleveland the favor of trading them CJ McCollum. Like they were trying to work out a Love and McCollum and get swap deal in somewhere in there. But Portland's a really interesting team. Last week, apparently, Damian Lillard had a meeting with Paul Allen, the team owner, to sort of reaffirm, quote unquote, his commitment to the team, but also ask about the direction and let it be known that he was still pissed off that they got rid of Will Barton because it was like the exact kind of player that they need to have. We talked a little bit about this when we did the live show after Spurs Cavs, I think. Portland's a really interesting case where they had so many interesting pieces for a couple of years. And I was like, what's Portland going to do with all these interesting guys? Like all these stretchy, interesting dudes they've drafted and have developed, and they play in this cool offense by Terry Stotts. And now they have a bunch of guys who are just like, okay. Yeah. It turns out that those guys were just okay, and that Ed Davis and Aminu and all these dudes are just okay, and that Myers Leonard's not really okay at all. And what are they going to do? They basically have 3 good players. They have Nurkic, Lillard, and McCollum.
Yeah, they're basically a poor man's version of Boston.
Yeah.
Where it's like O'Shea has set himself up as this kind of trader Neil.
Right.
Much like Danny Ainge, just always in asset accumulation mode. And he went as far as bringing a lot of guys back on a lot of bad contracts under the assumption that he could eventually trade them. Now it just so happens that the cap spike, it looks way worse in retrospect, and now they're stuck in the middle here. And now you're starting to hear rumors about, hey, what if Neil O'Shea goes before this past offseason goes to be the Lakers GM?
Yeah.
What if he goes back to the Clippers and does that? And now you start to see what happens when you play for the middle.
Yeah.
And this is the problem not only in the NBA as a whole, but in this era where the Warriors are.
So do you think O'Shea's idea was, I'm going to have all these guys who are valuable in today's NBA, rangy shooters, at least like they track as people who could be taught how to be
Von Lay type.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then when it's time, when Paul George comes up, when one of these guys is available, I'm the guy who can say, here, I'll send you a quarter of my roster, for a star player. I'm available.
What assets?
Was that the plan?
I don't know. I mean, I don't.
Or did they think Ed Davis and Aminu were going to get them to the top part of the Western Conference?
Perhaps, like you're hoping those guys make some, they develop some. I mean, in terms of Damian Lillard, it's interesting he mentions Will Barton, because they paid a Will Barton comparable and Evan Turner $17 million annually.
Yes.
And Evan Turner, maybe not better than Will Barton. I mean, depending on the type of player you want. Will Barton's certainly a better scorer, right? And Evan Turner has not come close to meeting expectations in Portland, especially for the money. So it's like he had to do something. He had to add some guys, but some of those guys he added and paid turns out to be mistakes.
Well, yeah, I don't think he made a bad move per se. I think if you were looking at the GM handbook, they would say, don't lose an asset for nothing. Get guys on good contracts, because those are the guys you can always trade. Aminu is a good contract. I love that signing. Ed Davis is a fine player on a good contract. But it just so happens that, one, he did some of those moves during the cap spike, and the other one is just like, I don't know if any of these guys really ascended while under Terry Stotts' kind of overview. And so because of that.
We say all that. They worked the Wolves last night at home, and the third quarter where they scored, I believe, 43 points, Damian Lillard called it their best quarter in 2 years. And I watched that third quarter. And I watched it also against the third quarter that they had played a few weeks before in Minnesota against the same team. And it was like a college football game. It was like one of those things where you see a team playing at home and you're like, this team could win the finals. And then you see them play in Minnesota and you're like, oh, these guys like are probably a lottery team, right? And the difference really was that offense was generating so much energy running downhill at home. I felt like everything, all the threes, all the movement had so much more momentum at the Rose Garden or whatever they call that place, but like in Portland than it did on the road. And I wonder for you, Kevin, when you watch Portland, who have become more known for their defense this year than that thick Terry Stotts playbook that's supposed to have so many cool plays. What do you think that they can hope for with this roster that they have? What's the best version of them?
That's a tough part with them, right? Mark Stein speculated that they'll split up Lillard and McCollum, and that's something we talked about last year on TheRinger.com, where it's like, what is your upside with that backcourt, right? They're not good defensively with those guys, but at the same time, they've been better.
A backcourt that they're paying almost quite a lot, $60 million.
It's tempting to stick with that, but at the same time, like you talk about McCollum versus Love, I'm not doing that if I'm Portland. I'm not, because Love isn't helping your defense either. If you're trading McCollum, I think it needs to be for a guy who better complements Damian Lillard in terms of defense, but also contributing offensively. I don't think a McCollum for Love trade gets them any better. It might even get them worse, because as you mentioned, the firepower that they had in that third quarter is remarkable. I think trading one of those guys might be what it takes to get them to the next level. But the question is really what's out there for it. It's hard to find a trade for McCollum.
Like, it sucks, but what about McCollum for Tobias Harris and Avery Bradley, with the assumption that you re-sign Avery?
I don't know.
That'd be tough. I don't know if it puts them any closer to what they're going for there.
And isn't Tobias Harris, like, aren't you surprised that he isn't already on the Blazers, given, like, he's the exact kind of, like, oh, yeah, maybe Tobias Harris?
They didn't get Melo, so they might as well get Diet Melo.
Yeah, right.
And Avery's still a small guard,
right?
I mean, he's a great defender, but he's still small. I mean, if you can find a wing who's versatile, long, able to defend up the forwards and wings and guards, then that's what you're looking for. But those guys are hard to find.
It's just interesting with a team like that, and a lot of teams kind of in the middle here. You're almost asking them to just pull out the guts of who they are.
And that's what you were just saying about Cleveland.
Yeah, it's really.
This is the thing that I'm talking about. It's like, are we losing it a little bit because our concept of competing is distorted so much by the Warriors, and to some extent the Rockets, and to some extent Cleveland itself.
Sure.
That you're like, oh yeah, let's just rip up this awesome backcourt.
You know where the mistake might have been made? When they traded 15 and 20 for 10, and they took Zach Collins rather than
Not
Mitchell, rather than even Bam Adebayo, who some teams did like in that range, Bam. Yeah. I heard Charlotte was looking at him before the Dwight Howard trade, so he could have gone 11, Bam. So maybe at 10,
maybe that was
Bam
just like,
if
like Charlotte's looking at this guy, we should run in the other direction.
Wasn't Jimmy Butler laughing at Zach Collins on the bench the other day?
Charlotte liked Mitchell too, and that was from before the draft.
Yeah,
they liked Mitchell, but I think Monk, when he fell, it's the type of thing. Well, can't pass up on Monk. Need a high volume shooting guard.
That's going well for them.
Yeah, right.
Really well.
Okay,
yeah.
So currently Portland are they are 7th in the West. They've won 6 out of their last 10. They have a positive point differential. But do you see this as a team that could get up to 5th, or is the top 5 teams, the Thunder, the Wolves, the Spurs, the Rockets, and Warriors, are they starting to separate themselves a little bit for you?
separating themselves.
Yeah,
I mean, I think those teams are on another level. Those top 5.
You think the Pelicans can get in there? And
I
that
really
group?
like
Six right now.
As a group.
6 right now.
They're kicking ass.
They have 2 of the best 10 players in the freaking league.
They are. This is like the
all-star starters.
Yeah, and they are the. They're like, I love that they're like this is the best that we could do. We could get these 2 guys,
Right.
And we signed a bunch of dudes that they want to play with because that's like Jameer and Rondo or whoever else.
A bunch of Kentucky guys.
Yeah, and they are busting ass every night. And like sometimes DeMarcus gives up, and sometimes like Brow gets hurt, and sometimes they just get worked. But man, like on any given night, they are an any given night team. Like
Yes.
on any given night, the Pelicans could beat almost anyone.
And last night was a perfect example because they pretty much hung around with Charlotte, the team that we just talked about is not having much of anything, and they almost lost that game. It came down to the wire. They just need to be a little bit better than they've been before, and that's going to make the difference between being a bottom seed and being maybe like a 4 or 5 seed.
Isn't it amazing how close they are yet how far they are?
Yeah,
away,
always. That's what you can say about them for the past 4 years.
It's
This
something
is
else.
this in that little zone there. That 3. I can't say 7, but that 3 to 6 zone is the spot where I feel like we're going to get an upset in the playoffs. An upset like a lower seed could beat. So whether it's just the Thunder beat the Wolves or the Wolves beat the Thunder, depending on who's where. Yeah. But the Pelicans and the Spurs, and I wanted to talk about the Spurs now because the Spurs are in a real weird, like, you watch them against Cleveland, that's just like the San Antonio business card, man. Like they just with Bertans and Murray starting for the first time in his career and Joffrey and all these guys, and they're still whipping the ball around and they're still running their stuff and they're still defending. They're the number 1 defensive rating at last time I checked NBA.com. And yet no star player, Kawhi Leonard out indefinitely, grumblings about some problems there, but I think that's a little bit overblown. And What is this season for the Spurs? Is this a season of transition secretly of getting guys like Murray ready to play ball?
I think it turned into that when Kawhi didn't play. I think it's the rise of Big Bert here.
Yeah.
He's really kind of come on.
Sick.
Yes, he's very good.
That's the thinking man's marketing right there.
Right, and DeJounte's the type of guy I can't remember them ever having. He's a young American dynamic kind of athlete point guard.
Yeah.
And I feel like that could be a game changer for them, especially if with Tony Parker kind of going out to pasture this season.
When they drafted him, I was in the middle of recording a video at TD Garden at the NBA draft party that night. Like it was announced on the big screen as we were recording. I remember looking up while recording the video, hearing DeJounte Murray drafted by the Spurs, and I was both at the same time surprised and also unsurprised in the sense that he's not their type of player, and yet the fact is he is exactly the type of guy who slipped the 30th, who some projected as a lottery player, who the Spurs could take his weaknesses and turn them into strengths, and that's exactly what they're starting to do.
Yeah, they basically put him in bubble wrap for a season.
He went in the perfect situation for his game. I mean, some of the weaknesses he had at Washington, inefficient scoring, unable to score from outside, poor decision-making, inconsistent effort, those aren't issues as much now.
We haven't
right?
seen
I mean,
it.
that
The
doesn't sound
Spurs
like
haven't
him.
had an athlete at point guard like him in a long time. And watching him D up LeBron at various points in that Cavs game, I was just like, this is incredible. Like if they do get Kawhi back at something like 100%, like that's a scary team.
Yeah, I remember watching him early on in the season. His rebounding numbers were just off the charts for a point guard.
Yeah.
It's like, how does this even happen? And it's also interesting watching some of their older guys.
He was grabbing boards over Kevin Love. Like he grabbed that one off the free throw.
He's
off
very
Love.
long.
Yeah.
And it's crazy watching it come
Great
out.
instincts as well.
Yeah.
I just love watching some of their older guys come in and out of the lineup and just kill it. Like Paul Gasol, like in the third quarter, and they were playing Memphis, and I don't know what Marc Gasol is doing these days. He's barely even trying, but he had like a almost triple-double in the third quarter.
Yeah.
I was like, what is going on here?
And it's the dependability of guys like Powell and knowing you can get 23 to 26 points a night from LaMarcus, that allows them to be risky with some of their other personnel decisions because they have that baseline of performance from their veterans. And if they get the kind of night they got from Tony Parker against Cleveland going forward, like that's a real thing.
For sure, and I think with Parker coming off the bench, it's an interesting little wrinkle for that team. You're maybe extending his career a little bit by putting him off the bench. Having him come out against bench guys. I think that's the formula for them moving forward, and it'll be interesting to see with Parker what happens moving forward. I mean, I know like we're talking about this season, what's the best version of these teams, but I'm always thinking forward with the summer decisions to come, for better or for worse. And with Parker, it'll be interesting seeing him in that bench role and how he develops and how Murray gets empowered as a starter alongside their best players.
The Spurs are always interesting to me in comparison to the Pelicans, not only because I'm always thinking about the Pelicans, but some of their principles come from that system. Dell Demps famously was in the front office there. You could see how they just don't need everything all the time. And they're able to just kind of take the best of certain guys. Whereas the Pelicans, the big worry is they're always on the throttle, always playing for that season. And I think you see it with some of the minutes their big guys are playing.
And to convince Boogie to stay and to convince AD not to demand a trade and all that stuff. There's like a real the franchise future is on the line here.
Right. The minutes between Holiday, Anthony Davis, Cousins are all high up there. You wonder if that's going to have an effect in a playoff series. And also with Cousins, let's say they convince him to come back. Now you're paying almost 3 guys max. And that's just going to screw you in other ways. And I wonder what happens next season when they try to put guys around him. The guys like Darius Miller who might come up. Maybe you don't find him this time around and you're back into the dregs of the West again.
I just think the example the Spurs really set, and this is, it's old news because they've done it the entire century, but their just ability to integrate younger players within, their veteran core.
This is the difference between San Antonio and Cleveland,
Bertans, Anderson, Murray, Forbes, Paul. I mean, their ability to integrate all these young guys and let them develop.
Think about every guy that you see pop up on another team that's not as good as he was on the Spurs.
Yeah.
Dedmon, Joseph, Simmons, good players.
They've had very few free agents who leave the Spurs and end up better in a new situation.
I want to wrap up, but let's just quickly talk about Milwaukee, who was the other, like 10 years ago, earlier this week when Jason Kidd got fired, was the big deal. They're 24-22. They're basically hanging on to the playoffs by their fingernails. They have apparently decided to go with Jim Punty? Joe Punty as their coach for the rest of the season. I don't know what they're going to do here. They have the top 5 NBA player. They should probably be pushing up towards where Toronto and Washington and Cleveland and Boston are, and instead we were wondering if they're going to make the playoffs at all. Is there are they doing a shadow tank here by not getting a new coach in? What's going on?
It's a bizarre move, and we don't know what's going on behind the scenes with all the personal dynamics, even though it sounds like Giannis's agent called literally every reporter after that all went out. But it is interesting there. If you're going to make a criticism of that move, why do you do that when you're in the playoff hunt? Why do you do that when Giannis is in kind of the MVP discussion? Why he's entering his peak? He's probably going to win. He won Most Improved last year, so he can't win it again. But it's a very bizarre timing, and it just speaks to maybe some of the dysfunction at the top of the ownership level because they're trading when someone gets to make the final call.
I think with Milwaukee, I had a conversation before the beginning of last season with an NBA executive, and he said Milwaukee reminded him of the early days of Cleveland where LeBron got too great too soon. So they didn't have the ability to be a bottom level team to get another high-end prospect in the draft, or at least a high-end contributing player. And Milwaukee, the same thing. Giannis got too good too soon for them to add that other guy. Yes, they have Jabari Parker. Yes, they got Malcolm Brogdon in the second round. Yes, they have Chris Middleton, but they still need that other star player. But they don't have him, and they don't really have a way to get him either, which is why they had to go for a guy like Eric Bledsoe.
You don't think Bledsoe's that guy?
I know, not at all. I mean, he's an inefficient half-court scorer. I mean, you need another star next to Giannis. And Jabari Parker could be that guy, maybe, but even then, he hasn't shown that he can stay on the floor.
Yeah, their last attempt at it was reaching for Thon, and maybe he becomes something, but it doesn't look like he's turning
not
much
there
this season.
And that was a gamble worth taking.
Sure.
I think, Thon Maker, I wasn't a big fan of him. I was shocked that they took him there, but at the same time, you can't knock him for that when you look at what else was on the board at that time. He's a high upside player at 10.
So given the talent on hand, what is the best version of Milwaukee this season?
It's a good question. I mean, they've been kind of talked about in the discussion for Kemba Walker. I don't know if he makes much sense there. It sounds like you're really committing to a core there that I wouldn't necessarily
panic.
Go for. Yeah,
that's a panic move.
Especially with Bledsoe, a free agent this offseason. You're going to have a backcourt of Kemba and Bledsoe going forward. That's pretty tiny.
I think their upside can be, maybe they won't reach, this seed, but I think if Parker gets back to full strength by the playoffs, they could be of a 3-4 seed quality team.
Didn't they have some trouble the last time they had to integrate Parker back into the rotation? It's like he's a weird mid-range scorer who holds the ball, and I don't know. I mean, I think they had something going earlier in the season, and then obviously the internal strife kind of got to them. It's just such a bold, weird move. I mean, by all accounts, Kidd was problematic there, but it's a big deal to do that.
Yeah, to wrap this back into the Cavs, it sounds like Parker might be in a similar situation with Kevin Love, where he is a dynamic offensive player. He provides some stretch, but I wonder what you could do with him on defense. You're effectively saying we need Giannis to be a 1-5.
Yeah.
all the time, and I just don't know if that's what you want to put on.
It's unfair to expect that from any player, especially over an 82-game season. Maybe in the playoffs, you want them to turn it on like that, but right now they're just kind of hanging on, like you said, Chris. And Parker's not going to help them defensively at all. I mean, he's a poor defender. He's a low effort.
Well, maybe some of the schemes, like just taking out some of the crazy blitzes the kid ran,
for sure,
will help them out a little bit.
More and more conservative would probably help them on that end, but at the same time, I mean, they still have personnel changes to be made, and they don't have a lot of flexibility to do it.
Okay. All right. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks for listening to Group Chat. We'll be back next Thursday. Make sure you're listening to all the Ringer NBA shows. Kevin is routinely weekly on Tuesdays with Chris Vernon. And we'll be back in your ears sooner than later.